Now, a few weeks ago on my channel, I produced a video showing a technique for providing watering at root level to tomatoes. And that video generated an awful lot of questions in relation to different aspects of growing tomatoes. But the most common question that came up related to how to prune tomatoes and how to support them. And because of that, I thought it'd be worth producing a short video showing you a technique for pruning tomatoes that can help to make your tomato plants as productive as possible. I'll also show you the most effective way for staking or supporting your tomatoes and provide one or two other hints and tips along the way. As you can see, I have my tomatoes growing in pots or containers, but the technique I'm going to show you will work just as well whether you're growing your tomatoes directly outside in the ground, in a greenhouse or in a polytunnel, or even in grow bags. Now, for the purposes of the video, I'll be demonstrating this technique using two different varieties of tomatoes. The first one is a variety here which is called red cherry. That's a small cherry tomato, and this one here on the other side is a variety called Marmande, which is a bush variety of tomatoes. Now, tomato plants do grow quite fast, particularly when the temperature starts to improve, and they can very quickly get out of hand to a point where it would appear that you've got lots of growth, lots of leaves, lots of greenery everywhere, but actually that can be detrimental to your overall crop. Because the more growth on a plant, the more side shoots and branches and leaves it throws out, the more pressure there are on the roots to provide nutrients and water. Now, it's really important that we provide enough nutrients and water to support the plant, and therefore by pruning your plants, it makes your plants much more productive because it's giving the roots the capacity to provide the amount of nutrients you need for the plant that you've got. So tidying up your plant and pruning, although it might seem a little bit harsh when you're cutting off branches, is actually very good for your tomato plants, and that usually results in larger, more productive crops. So what you could potentially end up doing is producing lots of greenery and growth and leaves, but very few tomatoes, which clearly is not going to be the main objective. Another fantastic reason for pruning your tomato plants is if you can keep a tidy area around the plant, so you haven't got branches going here and touching plants, it provides really good air circulation around the plant. That will mean any moisture that's on the leaves will dry out really quickly, and that will significantly reduce the possibility of fungal and bacterial attacks, particularly something like tomato blight, which I had a couple of years ago, and it devastated my whole tomato crop within a very short period of time. But by tidying your tomato plants and providing good air circulation around the plants, just by trimming them and pruning them, it does help to prevent that from happening. Now, the single stem method of pruning your tomatoes is exactly as it sounds. It's just allowing one main single stem right from the bottom of the plant all the way up to the top. And as the plant grows, you're monitoring that stem and just making sure that when the new branches start to appear higher up, you're just allowing that one stem to grow all the way up. That will mean taking off branches and something called suckers, which are the little tiny new growth that will grow in between the branch and the main stem. When we get those, we need to pinch them or nip them off. And if they've gotten to a position where they're too big, you might need to use a set of secateurs or garden scissors to remove them completely. Now, one really important point about using secateurs or garden scissors to prune your tomatoes, they have to be completely clean and sterilised. These would be washed in hot soapy water, but you could easily use alcohol or hydrogen peroxide to sterilise them. And the reason you'll do that is because as you cut or prune your tomatoes, if you've got any bacteria or fungus on your blades, all you're going to do is absorb that into the plant. So always make sure you use clean, sterile cutting equipment, i.e. pruners, secateurs or garden scissors when you're pruning your tomatoes. Now, to maintain a single stem, I will monitor the growth of this plant as it starts to progress. And as the plant gets higher and higher, I'll be just making sure that I've got a single stem. And as I see any of those suckers, which are those new branches that start to grow between the main stem and another branch, I'll pinch those off. If they've got to a stage where they're too big to pinch off, I'll get my secateurs and gently nip them off. It's really important when pruning that you remove the leaves near the bottom of the plant. You'll notice that I've cut off the leaves just at the bottom. You can see where the previous branches were. And the reason for that is because when we water the plant, we don't want to wet the foliage at low level because that can introduce fungi or bacteria into the plant, which can spread. Always cut off the leaves at low level. And when you do water, always water at the base of the plant and give it a good soaking rather than over the top of the foliage. Never water over the foliage. You want to keep the leaves as dry as possible and allow the roots to provide all the moisture and nutrients that the plant needs. You'll notice that I've placed these water bottles here and here into the pot, and there is a video on my channel which I'll put a link to in the description below showing you how to do this and why it's so important. I'm not really worried at this time of year with filling those water bottles because it's quite rainy at the moment, but when the temperature starts to get really warm, we have long periods of dry weather, I will water directly into the bottles rather than at the base of the plant, and that'll ensure that the water goes directly into the roots. If you do see any new branches starting to grow at low level, just cut them off. I think there's a really good clearance in this plant between the lower leaves and the compost, but whether you're planting in the ground or in pot soil containers, that's roughly the distance of where you want your lower leaves between there and the compost or the ground. Something else that's really important for tomatoes is that when they start to grow, you must provide support for them. If you don't provide support, like I have a simple garden cane here, the plants are just going to flop over and they will break or snap because even the plants themselves are heavy. But when they start to produce the tomatoes themselves, they get even heavier. So in this example, I've used a single stake here, or a garden cane. What I'm currently using are these twist garden ties just to tie the tomato to the cane. Now, I have ordered some vinyl garden tape which is expanding, which hasn't arrived just yet, and I'm going to replace these ties with the vinyl garden tape. And the beauty of the vinyl tape is that when I've put it on, as the tomato starts to grow and the stem starts to expand, the vinyl tape will stretch. But these type of ties, there's no flexibility in them, so you've got to be careful using flexi ties or even string or any type of tie that has the possibility of strangling or choking the plant as it gets thicker, because there's no movement or flexibility in the tie. But if you are going to use these twist garden ties, you have to make sure you put them on fairly loose so there's enough space in between the stem and the tie itself. So what I do is I'll hold the back of the tie and tie it on the front so that if I wanted to now, I could get my finger between the tie and the plant. That will hold it to the cane and gives it a bit of room for movement. So if you are going to tie tomato plants to your supports, make sure they're not too tight, because you've got to allow room for the stem to grow. Otherwise you'll choke the plant, and that could result in the plant completely dying because you'll end up preventing the nutrients and the moisture from the roots through to the stem. Now I'm hoping that what I'm going to need is this one single support cane, but I will monitor this, and if the plant starts to get quite large and there's lots of tomatoes on that which are quite heavy and weighty, I might add a secondary cane into here and just tie it to the plant just to give it that extra level of support. If you don't use a single stem method and you allow your branches to go everywhere, you're not going to be able to support your plant on one cane. You might need trellising or some other form of support, and as I've mentioned previously, it doesn't really do the plant any good in relation to the capacity of the roots if there's so many branches and leaves all over the place. Now obviously plants can't talk to us, but by looking at them we can tell by the nature of their leaves whether there's any problems. What we're looking for on tomato plants is exactly like this. We're looking for vibrant growth, really nice dark green colour, and the plant just generally looks healthy. If however we see leaves that start to discolour, you can see this one's just starting to get a little mottled effect on that. I don't think that is a major problem at this stage, but just to be on the safe side, and particularly because it's a lower leaf, I'm just going to take my secateurs and I'm just going to nip that one off right near the main stem. Because what I want to do is make sure I reduce the ability for any type of problem with the tomato plant, and by removing these types of leaves, that's going to help to ensure the plant stays healthy. Now if the leaves on your tomato plant start to go light green or even yellow, or start to curl up on the edges, the plant is either telling you it's either not had enough water or it's not got enough nutrients. And that's where you might want to introduce a tomato feed such as this. This is one that I use regularly. I don't advocate this one, by the way. I'm not advertising this one. It's just one that I think is a really good one. But all tomato feeds, it's really important you read the back and look at the dilution that's needed. This one is telling me that I need 20 millilitres of this feed in a 4.5 litre watering can. My watering can is around about 9 litres, so I'm going to need 40 millimetres of this. There is a cap at the top which has a little measure. You can measure exactly the amount you actually need. If you are going to use tomato feed, make sure you put tomato feed in the watering can first and then add the water, and that will allow it to mix appropriately. Now as a general benchmark, the right time to use your tomato feed for the first time is when the first flower trusses start to appear on the plant, just like here. So this is telling me now this plant is ready for feeding. I will probably feed this plant round about every 2 weeks using the feed and watering in the bottle so that it goes directly down to the roots. You have to be mindful as well with plants that you don't overfeed them. So always follow the instructions carefully. Now I'm really pleased with the way my tomatoes are growing this year. I'm looking forward to a really good crop. And the techniques that I've just demonstrated are really going to help to make my crop as productive as possible. However, it's always worth keeping an eye on tomato plants because they can be temperamental dependent upon weather conditions, ground conditions, whether or not they're getting enough nutrients. So always look for those clues in the leaves. They usually are the indicator to tell you how healthy your plants are. These are lovely, vibrant and dark green, and they're growing really well at the moment. So I will need to keep monitoring these, particularly when the weather gets warmer. There's going to be a high demand for water for these tomato plants, and as they get bigger. So you do need to continually monitor the health of your plants. But I really hope the techniques that I've demonstrated in this video will help you to produce your own healthy, vibrant tomato plants. Now, as I've mentioned previously, I'm growing 2 varieties myself, red cherry here and Marmande here. I'd really be interested to see what varieties of tomatoes you're growing. Maybe you could suggest 1 or 2 varieties I might think about growing next year that I've not grown before. So if you want to pop a comment below with your suggestions, I'd really appreciate that. And I do hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and flowers and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.